The wind in the Bitterroot Mountains doesn't just blow, it howls. It cuts right through your clothes, through your skin, and chills you straight to the bone. It carries the taste of snow and forgotten stories. And in 1873, it was howling over a fresh grave. Kneeling beside that grave was a man named Samuel Blackwood. The cold was a living thing, seeping up from the frozen Montana earth. But Sam didn't feel it. Or maybe he just didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the simple wooden cross, the name carved into it, a fresh wound in his soul. Thomas Blackwood, 1848-1872. Beloved brother. In his hand, Sam clutched a silver pocket watch. It was the only warmth he had. He'd been holding it so tight the metal had soaked up the heat from his skin. He flipped it open. The inscription inside was delicate, a woman's touch. To Thomas, my heart keeps time with yours. Eleanor. A ghost of a whisper escaped Sam's lips, his breath turning to smoke in the freezing air. Rest easy, Tom. I'll find her. He stood up, his joints cracking like frozen timber. At 34, Sam felt like an old man. The war had stolen his youth, the mines had taken his father, and consumption, that slow, creeping thief, had stolen his brother. All he had left was a promise made to a dying man. He mounted his horse, a tough chestnut gelding that had seen as many hard miles as he had, and turned east, away from the mountains, away from the grave, towards a ghost named Eleanor, towards a promise that was already costing him everything. A month of hard riding and cold camps brought Sam to a place called Clearwater. It wasn't much more than a muddy street clawed out of the wilderness, a collection of tired wooden buildings huddled together against the coming winter. He'd followed whispers, rumors, the faintest trail of a woman with dark hair and sad eyes. His supplies were nearly gone. Winter was closing in like a fist. He needed lumber and seeds for a small plot of land he'd claimed 40 miles north, a place he hoped to one day call home. But first, the promise. He tied his horse outside the general store, the only place that looked like it had a pulse. A little bell jingled as he stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, leather, and wood smoke. A balding shopkeeper nodded at him. Afternoon? New to these parts? Just passing through, Sam said, his voice a low rumble. Need some provisions. As the shopkeeper gathered his things, two men leaning against the far counter kept talking, their voices low and laced with town gossip. Sam wasn't trying to listen, but one name cut through the noise and hit him like a physical blow. Left her standing right there at the altar, just rode off. Heard he's in Idaho now. Can't blame him. No dowry, no kin since the fever took her folks last fall. Pretty enough, I suppose, but what good is pretty out here? Preacher's letting her stay at the church for now. Pitiful thing. Eleanor Ward. Sam's hand froze over a sack of coffee beans. Eleanor Ward. The name was different, but it had to be her. After a month of chasing shadows, could it really be this simple? He turned to the men, his voice sharp, cutting through their conversation. This Eleanor, the woman at the church, what's she look like? The men looked up, surprised. The taller one, a man with a beard like a tangled bird's nest, shrugged. Slender, dark hair, talks proper, like she's from back east. It was her. It had to be. Sam threw some coins on the counter, his mind racing. He grabbed his supplies and headed for the door. I'll be back for the lumber, he told the shopkeeper. Need to see about something first. Outside, the cold air felt sharp, but Sam's blood was pounding in his ears. He walked down the muddy street, his boots sinking into the frozen muck, toward the small white church at the end of the road. And that's when he saw her. She was standing by the church fence, a faded blue dress clinging to her slender frame. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she was staring out at the mountains, the same mountains where his brother lay buried. There was a quiet strength in the way she stood, a dignity that defied the whispers and the pity of the town. Sam's chest tightened. This woman was the keeper of his brother's heart. This was the woman he had promised to find. But as he watched her wrap a thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, a shiver running through her small frame, he realized the terrifying truth of his promise. Finding her wasn't enough. Thomas's last words, whispered with the last of his breath, echoed in Sam's mind. Promise me you'll make sure she's all right, Sam. Promise me she'll have a home, that she won't be alone. Looking at Eleanor Ward, abandoned, penniless, and alone in the heart of a merciless frontier, Sam knew what he had to do. It was a crazy, reckless plan, a plan that would tie his life to a complete stranger, a plan that would change everything. He turned away before she could see him and walked toward the saloon. He needed a drink, and he needed to confirm what he already suspected. He needed to know just how broken her life had become, because his plan depended on it. The saloon was half empty, smelling of stale whiskey and desperation. Sam ordered a drink and found a dark corner, letting the conversations wash over him. It didn't take long. Her name came up again, a piece of gossip passed around like a cheap bottle. That war woman's still at the church. Reverend Howard's too soft for his own good. Heard she came from money back east. Boston. Family cut her off when she got engaged to some soldier boy. Sam's grip tightened on his glass. A soldier boy. Yeah, a soldier died. Consumption, I heard. She came west to start fresh. Then that fella Reed left her at the altar. Why'd he do that? Found out about her past. Said he didn't want another man's leavings. The words hit Sam like a punch to the gut. Another man's leavings. They were talking about his brother. They were talking about Thomas. The rage that coiled in his stomach was cold and sharp. He downed his whiskey in one burning gulp and stood up. He had heard enough. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just a promise anymore. It was a debt, and he was about to pay it in the only currency he had left. He walked back to the church as darkness fell over the valley. The Reverend Howard, a kind-looking man with worry lines etched deep into his face, was tidying up. And there, sitting in the front pew, her back ramrod straight, was Eleanor. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her shoulders tense. "Can I help you, friend?" the Reverend asked. Sam's voice was quiet, but it filled the empty church. "I need a marriage license." The Reverend blinked, his gaze flicking from Sam to Eleanor. She turned then, and her eyes met his for the first time. They were the color of dark coffee, and they held a weariness that went deeper than just being tired. It was the look of someone who had been let down by the world one too many times. "You know her?" the Reverend asked, his voice cautious. "No," Sam said, his eyes still locked on Eleanor. "But I'm claiming her all the same." Eleanor stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't just a pitiful thing. She was a queen who had lost her kingdom, but not her crown. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Samuel Blackwood," he said, watching for any flicker of recognition. There was none. Thomas must have never mentioned his rough older brother. "I have a homestead 40 miles north of here. It's a hard life. I need a wife to help run it." Her eyes narrowed. "And you simply decided on me? A complete stranger you heard about in a saloon?" "I need someone capable," Sam said, his words stark and honest. "Someone who understands hardship. And you," he added, his voice softening just a fraction, "you need somewhere to go." It was a business transaction, cold, simple, brutal. The Reverend cleared his throat. "Miss Ward, perhaps you should consider—" "Why?" Eleanor interrupted, her gaze still fixed on Sam. The one word was loaded with 1,000 questions. Why her? Why now? Why this strange, hard-looking man with secrets in his eyes? Sam met her gaze without flinching. "Because I know what it is to be left behind." Something shifted in her eyes then, not recognition of his face but of his pain. A shared understanding of loss that crossed the space between them. She studied him, taking in the weathered face, the calloused hands, the lines of hardship carved around his eyes. She was weighing her options, a life of pity and charity in this town, or a life with a stranger in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Finally, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll marry you." The Reverend looked like he was about to protest again, but Eleanor spoke first. "I've had plenty of time to consider my options, Reverend. They are limited." Within the hour, it was done. Samuel Blackwood and Eleanor Ward, two strangers bound together by a dead man's promise in the harsh realities of the frontier. There was no ceremony, no rings, just the scratch of a pen on a piece of paper and the heavy weight of a secret Sam was determined to keep. As they left the church, stepping out into the cold Montana night, Eleanor had no idea that the man whose name she now carried was the brother of the man she had lost. And Sam, looking at the proud, broken woman beside him, wondered if his promise would save her, or if it would end up destroying them both. The journey north was a silent one. They left Clearwater at dawn, Eleanor sitting beside him on the hard wooden bench of the wagon, her few belongings in a small trunk in the back. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with everything that hadn't been said, everything they didn't know about each other. The mountains watched them, their peaks already crowned with snow. The world out here was vast and empty, a place that could swallow you whole without a trace. "Have you been in Montana long?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice nearly snatched away by the wind. "Came west after the war," Sam answered, his eyes on the trail. "Worked the mines for a few years. Decided I wanted my own piece of the sky." She nodded, pulling her thin coat tighter. "Your homestead, is it established?" "Cabin's built. Cleared 10 acres. It's not much, but it's solid." She looked out at the endless landscape. "I've never done farm work before," she admitted. He could hear the tremor of fear in her voice. Sam glanced at her. Her hands were delicate, soft. They looked like they belonged in a drawing room, not pulling weeds from frozen ground. "You'll learn," he said, his voice not unkind. "We all do." The day wore on, and the cold deepened. Sam saw her shivering, trying to hide it, her pride a thin shield against the biting wind. When they stopped to rest the horses, he pulled a heavy wool blanket from his pack and handed it to her. He didn't say a word. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you." He just nodded, turning to check the horse's hooves. He was a man of action, not words. It was easier that way. "Mr. Blackwood," she said suddenly, her voice sharp. He straightened up and faced her. Her chin was high, her eyes braced for his answer. "I should know what you expect of me, as your wife." He met her direct gaze. "I expect you to help maintain the homestead, cook, clean, tend the garden, nothing more than any partner would contribute." She flushed, her gaze dropping for a second. "And the other aspects of marriage?" Sam's face was a mask, but his voice softened. "The cabin has 1 bed. You'll take it. I'll sleep by the fire." He saw the relief flicker across her face, so fast it was almost invisible. But it was followed by a deeper confusion. "Then why marry me at all? You could have hired help." "Hired help leaves," Sam said, turning back to the horses. His voice was flat, final. "A wife stays." She didn't ask any more questions after that. She just watched him, this stranger who was now her husband. He was a mountain of a man, quiet and steady. There was a scar near his right temple and early streaks of gray in his hair. He wasn't handsome, not in the way of the men she'd known back in Boston. But there was a raw strength to him, a reliability she found herself clinging to after so much betrayal. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brutal shades of orange and purple, she asked another question. "What happened to your family? You said you knew what it was to be left behind." Sam was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough with a pain he tried to hide. "Father died in a mining accident. Mother passed years before. Had a younger brother." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Lost him last year. Consumption." "I'm sorry," she said softly. The words felt small and useless against the size of his loss. He just nodded. "We'll reach the homestead by nightfall. Snow's coming." As the last light bled from the sky, they saw it. A small, solid cabin nestled against a stand of pine trees, a thin curl of smoke rising from its stone chimney. It looked sturdy, safe. "You have someone here?" she asked, surprised by the smoke. "Left the fire bank this morning," he said, pulling the wagon to a halt. "Keeps the place from freezing." He helped her down, his hands strong and impersonal at her waist. For a moment she just stood there, taking in her new home. It was real. This was her life now. The cabin was 1 room, but it was clean and orderly. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers glowing like a watchful eye. A table, a few chairs, and a bed in the corner. Shelves lined the walls holding books, tools, and supplies. It was a man's space, but it wasn't unwelcoming. He brought in her trunk and set it near the bed. "There's stew in the pot," he said, nodding toward the fireplace. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. The stew was simple, venison and root vegetables, but it was hot and filling. It was the first real meal she'd had in weeks. "It's good," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. He just nodded. "Bed's yours," he repeated. "I'll take the cot by the fire." After dinner, he showed her where things were kept. He was patient, methodical. He was a man who left nothing to chance. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, as he headed for the door to check on the animals one last time. He stopped and turned. "Thank you for bringing me here." He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the firelight. "Get some rest, Mrs. Blackwood. Morning comes early." Left alone, Eleanor changed into a nightgown, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She slipped into the bed, the mattress surprisingly soft. The sheets smelled of pine and smoke, and something else. Something that was just him. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of him moving outside, securing their world against the coming storm. When he finally came back in, he moved with a quietness that was surprising for a man his size. He settled onto the cot with his back to her. In the darkness of that small cabin, miles from anywhere, two strangers, bound by a lie, tried to find sleep. Each of them was carrying secrets heavy enough to crush a person, and the biggest secret of all lay between them, ticking away like a silver pocket watch in the dark. The days fell into a rhythm, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Sam was up before dawn, the sound of him chopping wood or tending to the animals a steady beat to the start of each day. Eleanor would rise shortly after, stoking the fire, preparing breakfast, slowly learning the geography of her new life. The work was hard, harder than anything she had ever known. Her soft hands became chapped and calloused. Her muscles ached, but there was a strange satisfaction in it. The clean floors, the mended shirts, the smell of fresh bread baking in the hearth. It was real. It was hers. Sam was gone most of the day, preparing for the deep winter. He never asked for help, but he never refused it when she offered. He was a quiet teacher, showing her how to split kindling, how to smoke meat, how to read the sky for signs of a storm. They spoke little, but a strange kind of understanding grew between them in the silence. A week after they arrived, the first big snowstorm hit. It descended on the valley like a white wolf, howling and snarling, burying the world in a blanket of silence and fury. They were trapped inside the cabin. The world shrunk to the space of 4 wooden walls. The enforced closeness should have been awkward, but it wasn't. Sam sat at the table repairing a trap, his large hands surprisingly deft. Eleanor sat by the fire, mending a tear in his coat. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the raging wind. "Storms bother you?" he asked, his voice startling her out of her thoughts. "No," she said. Then she hesitated. "Sometimes, I just wonder if any of this is real." He looked up from his work, his gaze steady. "It's real." The question had been sitting on her tongue for days, a burning coal she couldn't swallow. "Why me, Samuel? Why did you really marry me?" He set down his tools, his full attention on her. His eyes in the firelight looked impossibly old. "Because no one else saw you." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow, because it was true. Her family in Boston saw a disappointment. The people of Clearwater saw a burden. The man who had left her at the altar saw another man's past. None of them had seen her. But this stranger, this quiet, haunted man, he had. They didn't speak of it again, but something had changed. The space between them was no longer a chasm of silence, but a quiet field where something new was beginning to grow. One afternoon, while Sam was out checking his trap lines, Eleanor was cleaning near his cot. Her hand brushed against something hard beneath his pillow. She pulled it out. It was the silver pocket watch. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew it instantly. The intricate engraving of a wolf howling at the moon on the case. She'd traced that design 100 times. It was Thomas's watch, the one she had given him before he left for the war. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled with the clasp. She flipped it open, already knowing what she would find. To Thomas, my heart keeps time with yours. Eleanor. The room tilted. The air grew thin. How? How could Samuel Blackwood have her Thomas's watch? The watch he had sworn he would carry with him always. She was still holding it, the cold metal a brand against her skin, when the cabin door opened. Sam stood there stomping snow from his boots, a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He froze when he saw the watch in her hand. The color drained from his face, leaving it a mask of gray stone. "You knew," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound in the sudden, deafening silence. "You knew who I was all along." He closed the door slowly, his movements heavy, deliberate. "Yes." "How?" The word was a cry of confusion, of a betrayal so deep it had no bottom. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not just his own pain, but the reflection of hers. "He was my brother." The words didn't make sense. Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, the watch clutched in her fist. "Your brother? Thomas. Thomas never mentioned a brother named Samuel." "He called me Sam," he said quietly. "We weren't close. Not for many years. We took different paths." The pieces began to click into place, each one a shard of glass in her heart. "He died of consumption," she said, her voice hollow. "You were with him when he died." Sam nodded, his face grim. "Last spring, in a mining camp near Butte. The anger came then, hot and sharp, burning away the shock. Why didn't you tell me? Why this lie, this cruel deception? Would you have come with me if you knew?" He shot back, his voice raw. "Or would you have spent every minute comparing me to his ghost?" The question silenced her, because she didn't know the answer. Would she have been able to see the man in front of her, or only the shadow of the man she had lost? "He made me promise," Sam continued, his voice softer now. "His last words. He made me promise to find you, to make sure you were all right." "So that's all I am to you?" she said, the bitterness rising in her throat. "An obligation? A promise to a dead man?" "At first," or he admitted, and his honesty was more painful than any lie. "When I first saw you in Clearwater, yes, that's all it was." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "But it's not anymore, Eleanor." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had pulled her from the wreckage of her life. The man who had given her a home, a purpose. The man who treated her with a quiet respect she hadn't known she was starving for. But he had built it all on a lie. "I need time," she said, her voice shaking. She stood up and placed the watch on the table between them, a silver barrier of memory and deceit. "I need time to understand." He nodded, his face a mask of sorrow. "You have it." That night sleep was impossible. She lay in the bed, and he lay on the cot, the few feet between them an impassable canyon. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas's face, smiling, full of life. Then it would dissolve into Sam's face, haunted and sad. The brother she loved, and the brother she had married. Thomas had spoken of an older brother, a wild, ambitious man who had left home young to chase his fortune. He had painted a picture of someone cold and uncaring. Nothing like the man who slept across the room, the man who had built her a home with his own two hands. The wind howled outside, a perfect match for the storm inside her heart. She had come west to find Thomas, to be with him in his final days. But she had been too late. By the time she reached Butte, he was gone. No one could tell her where he was buried, what had happened to his things. She had drifted, lost and broken, until she washed up in Clearwater. Until Samuel Blackwood had walked into that church and said the words that now echoed in her mind with a terrible new meaning. "Because I know what it is to be left behind." A single tear slipped from her eye, tracing a cold path down her cheek. Thomas was gone, but his brother had found her. He had kept his promise. But as she finally drifted into an exhausted, dreamless sleep, one question remained, burning like a fire in the darkness. Was it enough? The next morning, the silence in the cabin was a fragile, brittle thing. They moved around each other like ghosts, the unspoken words hanging in the air between them. After a tense breakfast, Sam left to check his trap lines, a silent retreat that Eleanor was grateful for. She threw herself into her chores with a frantic energy, scrubbing floors and washing linens as if she could scrub away the confusion in her heart. By mid-afternoon, she was exhausted, her hands raw, her mind still spinning. She was resting in the rocking chair by the fire when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A child's cry, thin and desperate, cutting through the winter silence. Eleanor rushed to the door and threw it open. Standing in the snow, huddled together for warmth, were two children. A boy, no older than 10, and a little girl who looked to be about 6. They were rail-thin, their clothes little more than rags, their faces smudged with soot and tears. "Please," the boy said, his voice cracking with cold and fear. "Our ma and pa." There was a fire. Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Come inside," she said, her voice gentle, ushering them out of the biting wind. "Quickly, you're half frozen." She settled them by the fire, wrapping them in blankets. The little girl clung to her brother, her eyes huge and dark in her small, pale face. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood," she said softly. "What are your names?" "Joseph," the boy answered. "This is my sister, Sarah. Our cabin, it burned 2 nights ago. Pa tried to put it out, but the roof, it fell in." His voice broke, and a shudder ran through his small body. "Ma went in after him. I tried to get her out, but—" "Shh," Eleanor soothed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you could. You were brave. You saved your sister." The little girl Sarah looked up at her face a heartbreaking mix of innocence and grief. "Are you an angel?" she whispered. Eleanor's heart cracked. "No, sweetheart, just a friend." She looked at their gaunt faces, the hollows under their eyes. "When was the last time you ate?" "Yesterday," Joseph mumbled. "Found some berries." Eleanor immediately set about warming the stew from the night before, cutting thick slices of bread. The children ate like starving animals, their small hands shaking as they lifted the spoons to their mouths. Eleanor had to turn away, blinking back tears. She was helping Sarah wash the soot from her face when the cabin door opened. Sam stood on the threshold, his face grim from the cold. He stopped dead, his eyes taking in the scene. The two children huddled by his fire, Eleanor kneeling beside them. "They lost their parents," Eleanor explained quickly, her voice tight. "A cabin fire. They've been walking for 2 days." Sam's gaze moved from the children to her, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. He slowly crossed the room and knelt in front of Joseph, who watched him with a wary, exhausted gaze. "You too hungry?" Sam asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Joseph nodded, his arm tightening around his sister. "Yes, sir." "Got names?" "I'm Joseph. This is Sarah." Sam nodded solemnly. "Joseph and Sarah. Good, strong names." He glanced up at Eleanor, a silent question in his eyes. Then he looked back at the children. "You can stay here. Get warm. Get fed. You're safe now." The relief that washed over the boy's face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. That night the small cabin felt different. Fuller. Eleanor made up beds for the children on the floor near the hearth, using every spare blanket they had. After they were tucked in, exhausted and finally warm, Eleanor and Sam sat at the table. The lie between them was still there, a silent ghost in the room. But now, there was something else. 2 small, sleeping children. "What will happen to them?" Eleanor asked in a low voice. "Is there an orphanage?" Sam shook his head. "Nearest one's in Helena, 100 miles from here, a world away." Eleanor looked at the sleeping forms of Joseph and Sarah. Their small faces, so peaceful in sleep, belied the horror they had endured. "They have nothing, no one." "No," Sam agreed, his gaze following hers. "They don't." They sat in silence for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. The weight of the decision hung in the air. "Then they stay here," Eleanor said, not as a question, but as a statement. Her eyes dared him to disagree. Sam looked at her, at the fierce, protective light in her eyes. He saw the woman from Boston, the abandoned bride, disappear, replaced by something stronger, something more primal. A mother. He gave a single, slow nod. "They stay." Eleanor reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. It was the first time she had touched him since finding the watch. "You're not like him, are you?" she whispered. Thomas was, he was gentle. "You're different." He didn't pull his hand away. "He was the better of us." "No," she said, her voice firm. "Just different." In that moment, something new was forged between them, a partnership born not of a promise to the dead, but of a duty to the living. They were two broken people, trying to piece together a life from the shards of what they had lost. And now they had two more broken pieces to care for. "I'll build another room onto the cabin," Sam said, his voice practical, pulling them back from the edge of emotion. "They'll need their own space." Eleanor nodded. "And clothes. And everything." Later, as she lay in her bed, listening to the soft breathing of the children, the silence from Sam's cot across the room felt different. It was no longer a silence of anger and betrayal. It was a silence of waiting, of watching, of wondering if four broken people could somehow, against all odds, make a whole. The first thaws of spring were still a distant promise when the trouble arrived. It came in the form of a man on a fine horse, a man dressed in clothes too clean for the frontier, a man Eleanor knew all too well. She was outside showing Joseph how to mend a fence post when she saw him riding up the trail. Her blood ran cold. "Joseph," she said, her voice sharp, "go inside, take Sarah into the new room and stay there until I call for you. Do not come out. Do you understand?" The boy saw the look on her face and didn't argue. He just nodded, his young face grim, and ran for the cabin. Eleanor stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs, as Nathaniel Reed reined in his horse. He was the man who had left her at the altar, the man who had called her another man's leavings. He dismounted, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. "Eleanor, I must say, marriage and motherhood seem to agree with you. You've filled out." His eyes roamed over her, insolent and possessive. She felt a surge of cold fury. "It's Mrs. Blackwood," she said, her voice like ice. "And this is private property. State your business and be on your way." His smile widened. "Oh, but that's just it, my dear. That's my business. You see, as the new county clerk, I've been reviewing the land claims in this valley, and it seems your husband's paperwork has some irregularities." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. "My husband's claim is perfectly legal," she said, her chin high. "Is it?" he purred, taking a step closer. "Discrepancies in the boundary lines, missing signatures. It would be a shame for you and your little orphans to be evicted, especially with winter not yet over." He was enjoying this, enjoying her fear, her helplessness. But what he didn't know was that the woman he had abandoned was not the same woman standing before him now. "My husband is away," she said, her mind racing. It was a lie. Sam was hunting on the far side of the ridge, but Reed didn't need to know that. "He will be back by evening. You can discuss any business you have with him then." Reed laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I think not. I'd rather deal with you, Eleanor. We have unfinished business, you and I." He took another step, his hand reaching for her arm. "Perhaps we can come to a more personal arrangement." That's when the cabin door creaked open. Sam stood there, his hunting rifle held loosely in one hand. He hadn't been hunting on the far ridge. He had seen Reed coming and circled back through the trees. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes colder than the winter wind. "Get your hand off my wife," he said, his voice a low growl that promised violence. Reed snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. He paled when he saw Sam, the easy confidence draining from his face. "Blackwood, I was just discussing a legal matter with Mrs. Blackwood." "I heard you," Sam said, taking a slow step forward. "I heard every word." He was no longer the quiet, steady man Eleanor knew. This was a different Sam, a harder, more dangerous man. The man who had survived a war. "You come to my home. You threaten my wife. You threaten my children. I think you've made a mistake." "Now see here," Reed blustered, trying to regain his composure. "I am a county official." "You're a snake," Sam interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And you are not welcome on my land. Get on your horse. And if I ever see your face again, I will not be this polite. Reed looked from Sam's cold eyes to the rifle in his hand, and whatever courage he had evaporated. He scrambled back onto his horse, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. This isn't over, Blackwood. I'll ruin you. I'll see you thrown off this land. Sam just watched him, his expression unmoving, until Reed spurred his horse and galloped away down the trail. Only then did Sam turn to Eleanor. The hard mask dropped from his face, replaced by a fierce concern. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? She shook her head, a tremor running through her. No, you were here. He stepped onto the porch and pulled her into his arms, his embrace strong and sure. I'll always be here, he murmured into her hair. She leaned against him, her fear slowly receding, replaced by a sense of fierce, unwavering certainty. This man, this stranger, this brother of the man she had loved, was her husband. This cabin was her home. Those children were her family. And like Sam, she would fight to the death to protect it. The lie was still between them. The ghost of Thomas still walked the quiet corners of their lives. But standing there, wrapped in Sam's arms, Eleanor realized that some truths are not spoken in words. They are forged in fire and tested in the face of your enemies. And the truth was, she was no longer alone. But Nathaniel Reed was a man who did not forgive a humiliation. And they both knew, with a chilling certainty, that the storm was not over. It was just beginning. The threat from Reed hung over the homestead like a bad winter fog. Sam spent his evenings hunched over the table, poring over his copies of the land claim documents, searching for the loophole Reed was trying to exploit. There was none. The claim was solid, which meant Reed was simply manufacturing a lie, using his power as county clerk to create a crisis. He's trying to force us out, Sam said one night, his voice grim. He wants this land, the creek, the timber. He thinks he can scare us into selling for pennies. We won't, Eleanor said, her voice fierce. This is our home. The unspoken secret between them had shifted. It was no longer a wall, but a shared burden. Her love for Thomas was a part of their story, a part of what had brought them together. It was a debt Sam was repaying, but it was becoming something more. One evening after the children were asleep, Sam finally spoke the words that had been sitting between them for weeks. We need to talk about him, about Thomas. Eleanor looked up from her mending, her heart skipping a beat. Yes. He told her about their childhood, about a stern father and a life of hard work. He told her how he had left home, angry and wanting more, while Thomas, the gentler soul, had stayed. He told her about the years of silence between them, a gulf of pride and regret. When I heard he was sick, Sam said, his voice rough with emotion, I went to him. It was the first time we'd spoken in 10 years. He was in a mining camp, wasting away. But all he could talk about was you. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver watch. He placed it on the table, its surface gleaming in the lamplight. He told me about you, about Boston, about how you were the only good, true thing in his life. He was so afraid for you, afraid you'd be alone. Sam's eyes met hers and she saw the raw pain in them. His biggest regret wasn't dying, it was leaving you. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, silent and hot. He was everything to me, she whispered. I know, Sam said softly. He made me promise. Find her, Sam. Take care of her. Don't let her be alone. He ran a hand over his face, the gesture weary and full of grief. I never planned for this, Eleanor. For us. I know, she whispered back. The confession broke the last of the tension between them. The truth, in all its painful, complicated beauty, was finally out. They were bound not just by a promise, but by a shared love for a man who was gone. And in that shared grief, something new and fragile began to grow. Love. Different from the love she'd had for Thomas, but no less real. It was a quiet, sturdy love, built on shared hardship and mutual respect. A week later, a rider came from Clearwater. It wasn't Reed. It was an official courier, and he carried a formal notice. Nathaniel Reed, in his capacity as county clerk, had filed a legal challenge to the Blackwood homestead claim, citing significant boundary discrepancies and filing errors. A hearing was set in Clearwater in 30 days. If they did not appear, or if the claim was found invalid, they would be evicted. He's done it, Sam said, crumpling the notice in his fist. He's making it official. Can he win? Eleanor asked, her voice tight with fear. He controls the county records, Sam said, his jaw tight. He can make them say whatever he wants. Our copies won't be enough. It will be our word against his, and he's the county clerk. So what do we do? Sam stared out the window, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. There's only one thing we can do. The Territorial Land Office is in Helena. They have the original survey maps, the master copies of every claim. If I can get a certified copy from them, from a federal authority, Reed can't dispute it. Eleanor's heart sank. Helena? Sam, that's over 100 miles. Through the mountains. The passes are still thick with snow. It's our only chance, he said, his voice grim and determined. I have to go. I'll come with you. No, he said firmly. You have to stay here, with the children. Someone has to guard the homestead. Reed might try something while I'm gone. He turned to her, his hands gripping her shoulders. Eleanor, I need you to be strong. I need you to hold this place down. When will you leave? She whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. At dawn. That night, as Sam prepared for his journey, the weight of what he was about to do settled over the small cabin. It was a desperate gamble, a dangerous ride through a wilderness that had killed better men. Be careful, she said, her voice choked with emotion as she handed him a pack filled with food and extra blankets. He pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both fierce and tender. It was a kiss of desperation, of fear, and of a love that had finally found its voice. I made a promise to Thomas that I would take care of you, he murmured against her hair. I intend to keep it. He rode out as the first light of dawn touched the mountain peaks. Eleanor stood on the porch with Joseph and Sarah, watching until he was just a small speck against the vast, unforgiving landscape. He'll come back, Mama, Sarah said, slipping her small hand into Eleanor's. I know, sweetheart, Eleanor said, squeezing the little hand. He has to. But as she stared at the empty trail, a cold fear gripped her. Sam was riding to save their home, but Nathaniel Reed was a vindictive, cruel man. And now she and the children were here, alone, and completely defenseless. The days after Sam left crawled by, each one a small eternity. Eleanor kept the children busy, creating a bubble of normalcy in a world that felt anything but. They did chores, they read books, they baked bread. But every creak of the floorboards, every howl of the wind, sent a jolt of fear through her. Joseph, with a solemnity far beyond his years, appointed himself the man of the house. He patrolled the homestead with one of Sam's old hatchets, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. A week into Sam's absence, their tenuous peace was shattered. Eleanor was outside hanging laundry when she saw them, 3 riders coming up the trail, and at their lead was Nathaniel Reed. Her blood turned to ice. He had come back, and Sam was not here. Joseph! She screamed, her voice sharp with panic. Get Sarah! To the root cellar! Now! Go! She ran into the cabin and grabbed the rifle from its place above the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She had watched Sam load and clean it 100 times, but she had never fired it herself. She stood on the porch, the heavy rifle in her hands, as the 3 men reined in their horses. Well, well, Eleanor, Reed said, his eyes glinting with malicious pleasure. All alone, I see. Your husband seems to have abandoned you. He's not here, she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. You have no business here. Oh, but I do, he said, dismounting. The 2 men with him, rough-looking characters with cruel faces, stayed on their horses, their hands resting on the guns at their hips. I have a court order, my dear, an eviction notice. The judge found in my favor. This property is no longer yours. He held out a piece of paper. It looked official. It was a lie, she knew it was. But how could she prove it? I don't believe you, she said, raising the rifle. It was heavy, awkward. Get off our land. Reed laughed. Put that thing down, Eleanor. You don't have the stomach to use it. Now you can leave peacefully, or my friends here can persuade you. The choice is yours. One of the men on horseback smirked. We'd be happy to persuade her, Reed. Tears of rage and terror pricked Eleanor's eyes. She was trapped. There was no way out. Sam was gone. They had lost. But then she thought of the children huddled in the dark root cellar. She thought of the life they had built here, a fragile thing of hope and healing. She thought of Sam risking his life in the mountains for them, and a new strength, cold and hard as steel, flooded through her. I said, she repeated, her voice no longer shaking, but ringing with a deadly calm, get off my land. Reed's smile faded. He saw the change in her eyes. He took a step back. You're making a mistake. No, she said. You did. And she pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the explosion deafening in the winter quiet. She hadn't aimed at Reed, but at the ground just in front of his feet. Dirt and snow erupted, and Reed yelled, stumbling backward. The two hired guns, startled, reached for their weapons. But before they could draw, another sound cut through the air, a high, chilling war cry. From the woods behind the cabin, three figures emerged. They were Native Americans from the local Salish tribe. They were on horseback, their faces painted for a fight, rifles held at the ready. They had been Sam's friends, trading partners he had treated with fairness and respect when other white men had treated them with contempt. He had sent word to them before he left, a desperate plea for help if the worst should happen. Reed and his men froze, their faces a mask of terror. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. One of the Salish warriors, a man named Many Horses, who had shared many a pipe with Sam, leveled his rifle at Reed. His voice was low and dangerous. This is Blackwood land. He is our friend. You are not welcome here. Leave now. Reed, his face white as a sheet, didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled onto his horse, and he and his men galloped away as if the devil himself were on their heels. Eleanor stood on the porch, the rifle smoking in her hands as Many Horses rode up to her. He nodded his head in a gesture of respect. Blackwood is a good man. He said you had the heart of a she-bear. He was right. You will be safe. We will watch. He and his men melted back into the woods as silently as they had appeared. Eleanor sank to her knees, the rifle clattering to the porch floor, and finally let the sobs come. She had done it. She had defended her home. 2 days later, just as the sun was setting, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. It was Sam. He was slumped in the saddle, exhausted and trail-worn, but he was back, and he was not alone. Riding beside him was an older, distinguished-looking man. Eleanor ran to meet him, her heart so full it felt like it would burst. He swung down from his horse and caught her in his arms, holding her tight. It's over, he said, his voice thick with exhaustion and relief. It's all over. The man with him was Judge Caldwell, a federal judge from the Territorial Land Office in Helena. Sam had not only gotten the certified documents, he had presented his case, telling the judge about Reed's threats and corruption. The judge, an honorable man who had heard rumors of Reed's dealings before, had decided to see for himself. He had ridden back with Sam, armed with the full authority of the United States government. The final confrontation happened not at the homestead, but in the saloon in Clearwater. Judge Caldwell convened a public hearing, and one by one, he laid out the evidence of Reed's crimes, the forged documents, the altered boundary lines, the systematic fraud that had cheated honest homesteaders out of their land. Nathaniel Reed, stripped of his power and exposed as a common thief, was arrested by the town sheriff. As he was led away in disgrace, the people in the saloon, many of whom had once whispered about the pitiful Eleanor Ward, broke into applause. Standing at the back of the room, holding Sam's hand, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. The ghost of Thomas was finally at rest. The promise had been kept. As they rode back to the homestead that evening, the valley was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The children, safe and sound, chattered happily in the back of the wagon. Sam turned to her, a small, tired smile on his face. I never told you, he said softly. The night before Thomas died, he made me promise one more thing. What was it? She asked. He said, Sam, you've been alone too long. When you find her, don't just take care of her. Let her take care of you too. Let her heal that hard heart of yours. Eleanor looked at this strong, silent man who had crossed a wilderness to keep a promise. The man who had faced down her demons and his own. She reached out and placed her hand on his cheek. He was a wise man, your brother. Yes, Sam agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He was. He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, gentle kiss that held no secrets, no lies, no ghosts of the past. It was a kiss of new beginnings, of a love forged in the harshest of landscapes, a love that was as solid and enduring as the mountains that surrounded them. They had built a life from the ashes of grief, a family from the fragments of broken promises, and in that wild, beautiful, unforgiving place, they had finally found their home. They had faced down the worst the frontier could throw at them and come out stronger. But the world was changing, and forces even more powerful than a corrupt county clerk were coming for their valley. They didn't know it yet, but their greatest fight was still ahead of them. If you enjoyed this story of love, loss, and survival on the frontier, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the wild heart of the American West. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Eleanor's place. We'll see you in the next story.